Commander Rex Hardwick was having what he considered a perfectly adequate Tuesday morning aboard the research station Persistence when the universe decided to ruin it. The alarm klaxons were wailing like a dying space whale, red lights were flashing everywhere, and his coffee had gone cold. Again. "Sir, we've got an unscheduled arrival in Docking Bay 7, Lieutenant Pepper Mills announced, her voice climbing 3 octaves as she read her scanner. Well, it's technically a ship, but I'm using that term very loosely here." Rex squinted at the tactical display and immediately understood why Mills sounded like she'd been sucking helium. The object tumbling toward their station looked less like an escape pod and more like someone had put a tin can in a blender, added some scorch marks for flavor, and then kicked it down a flight of stairs. Twice. "Any life signs?" Rex asked, though he wasn't particularly optimistic. "One human, sir, somehow still alive, though our sensors keep insisting that's impossible." The pod crashed into the docking bay with all the grace of a drunken rhinoceros. When the smoke cleared and the emergency system stopped screaming, the airlock hissed open with a sound like a dying accordion. Out stumbled a human male who looked like he'd been personally introduced to every form of cosmic violence known to science. His clothes were more whole than fabric, his hair was singed into interesting geometric patterns, and he was limping with the casual confidence of someone who'd made peace with the concept of functional legs being optional. "Well," the human said, stretching and cracking his neck with a sound that made everyone in the vicinity wince. "That was refreshing. Nothing like a nice relaxing ride through a solar flare to wake you up in the morning." Dr. Quillix, the station's head medical officer and the galaxy's most enthusiastically curious 6-armed creature, practically teleported to the scene. His multiple appendages were already reaching for medical scanners before his brain had fully processed what he was looking at. "Oh my stars and nebulae," Quillix chittered, his voice reaching frequencies that made nearby electronics hum in sympathy. "This human is clearly in critical condition. Look at him. He's practically disintegrating before our very eyes." The human, who had introduced himself as Jake Morrison with the casual air of someone discussing the weather, glanced down at himself with mild interest. "Disintegrating? Nah, this is just Tuesday for me. You should see me on weekends." Rex watched this exchange with the growing suspicion that his adequate Tuesday was about to become a very complicated Wednesday. "Mills, escort our guest to medical. And Jake?" The human looked up with surprising alertness for someone who appeared to be held together by wishful thinking and cosmic stubbornness. "Try not to bleed on anything important." Jake laughed, a sound that was somehow both reassuring and deeply concerning. "Commander, I haven't bled on anything important in at least 3 star systems. I'm practically a professional at this point." As they made their way to the medical bay, Jake maintained a steady stream of cheerful commentary about his recent adventures, each revelation making Lieutenant Mills's note-taking more frantic and Dr. Quillix's medical readings more impossible. "So there I was," Jake continued, apparently oblivious to the fact that he was leaving a trail of cosmic debris and what appeared to be stardust, trapped inside a collapsing neutron star's gravity well, and I thought to myself, "Jake, this is either going to be really interesting or really brief." Turns out it was both. Rex had commanded this station for 15 years, had seen 3 different species achieve faster-than-light travel, and had once mediated a peace treaty between sentient crystals and aggressive gas clouds. But watching a human casually describe surviving what should have been 17 different types of certain death, while asking if anyone had snacks, was rapidly becoming the strangest thing he'd ever witnessed. And deep down, Rex had the uncomfortable feeling that this was just the beginning. Dr. Quillix had seen a lot of impossible things in his career as a xenobiologist and medical officer. He'd treated creatures that could photosynthesize their own anesthesia, beings that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, and once memorably, a patient whose entire circulatory system was made of liquid music. But Jake Morrison was rapidly becoming the most fascinatingly impossible thing he'd ever encountered. "Now, Jake," Quillix said, his 6 arms operating various medical instruments with the efficiency of a very enthusiastic octopus, "I need you to describe your recent medical history. Start with the most serious incident." Jake settled back on the examination table, which creaked ominously under what appeared to be perfectly normal human weight. Well, Doc, that's a bit like asking me to pick my favorite type of near-death experience. They're all special in their own way. Lieutenant Mills looked up from her note-taking, stylus poised. Just start with the most recent one. Oh, that'd be the plasma explosion on Kepler Station last week. Caught me right in the face while I was fixing their primary reactor. Stung a bit, but the real problem was that it vaporized my lunch. I was really looking forward to that sandwich. Dr. Quillix's primary scanner began making distressed beeping noises. Jake, our readings indicate you were exposed to enough plasma energy to instantly vaporize a small moon. How are you sitting here complaining about sandwich loss? Well, I did mention it stung. Buzzed. The station's head nurse chose this moment to review Jake's preliminary blood work. She took one look at the results, made a sound like a deflating balloon mixed with existential dread, and promptly fainted onto the medical bay floor. Is she okay? Jake asked, craning his neck to look at the unconscious nurse with genuine concern. She'll be fine, Quillix assured him, though he was beginning to understand Best's reaction. According to these readings, Jake's blood contained enough radioactive isotopes to power a small research station for a month. Now, about this plasma exposure. Any other recent incidents? Oh, loads. There was the time I got eaten by that space whale near the Andromeda Transit Hub. Fascinating digestive system, by the way. Took me 3 days to find the exit, and even then I had to ask for directions. Mills's stylus snapped in half. You were eaten by a space whale and survived? Survived is putting it a bit strongly. I was definitely eaten. But space whales have really efficient digestive processes, and I'm apparently not very nutritious. Plus, I helped the poor thing with some indigestion issues while I was in there. We parted on good terms. Dr. Quillix was now operating all 6 arms simultaneously, running every medical test known to galactic science. Each result came back more impossible than the last. Jake's cellular structure showed signs of having been subjected to temperatures that could melt titanium, radiation levels that should have turned him into glowing dust, and pressure differentials that should have compressed him into something resembling a very small, very dense pancake. Jake, Quillix said carefully, our scans indicate you've been exposed to the vacuum of space. Recently. Like very recently. Oh yeah, that was this morning. My escape pod lost hull integrity about 6 light-years back. Nothing serious, just a small hole you could fly a shuttle through. I plugged it with my jacket and held my breath for the rest of the trip. You held your breath in space. For 6 light-years. Well, mostly. I had to breathe a few times when I got distracted by some really pretty nebulae. Space is gorgeous this time of year. Mills had given up taking notes and was now just staring at Jake with the expression of someone whose understanding of basic physics had just been personally insulted by the universe. Dr. Quillix pulled up Jake's full-body scan and nearly dropped 3 of his instruments. Every organ showed signs of catastrophic damage that somehow hadn't prevented them from functioning. His bones appeared to have been broken and re-healed so many times they resembled abstract art. His nervous system looked like someone had used it to conduct a symphony written entirely in lightning. Jake, Quillix said slowly, according to every medical principle known to science, you should have been dead approximately 4,000 times over. How are you not only alive but asking if we have any snacks in the medical bay? Jake brightened considerably. Oh, you do have snacks? That's fantastic. Nearly dying always makes me hungry. And to answer your question, Doc, I've always been pretty durable. My mom used to say I was built like a brick shithouse, whatever that means. Bist had regained consciousness just in time to hear this exchange. She took one look at the medical readings, made the same deflating balloon sound, and fainted again. Is this normal for humans? Quillix asked Mills desperately. Mills looked at Jake, who was now examining the medical equipment with the casual interest of someone window shopping, then back at the impossible scan results. I really hope not, she said. By hour 6 of what Dr. Quillix was beginning to think of as the great medical mystery of 2387, the medical bay had attracted quite a crowd. Word had spread throughout persistence that they had a human patient whose medical readings violated approximately 17 fundamental laws of biology, 3 laws of physics, and at least 1 law of common sense. Jake, meanwhile, had made himself comfortable and was regaling anyone who would listen with tales of his recent employment history, each story more impossible than the last. So anyway, Jake continued, apparently oblivious to the fact that Chief Engineer Torx had just run screaming from the room. The job posting said asteroid mining, some danger involved, but they really undersold the whole mining asteroids that are actively exploding part. Great benefits though. Full medical, dental, and they had an excellent life insurance policy. Commander Rex had arrived an hour ago to personally interrogate their impossible guest. He was now regretting this decision intensely. "Jake," Rex said, using his most authoritative voice, "I need you to understand that what you're describing is not normal. Humans don't typically survive being crushed by collapsing asteroids." "Oh, I wasn't crushed, Commander. That would have been bad. I was just sort of compacted, like a really aggressive hug from a celestial body. The trick is to relax and go with it." Lieutenant Mills had filled 17 pages of notes and was working on her 18th. Her handwriting had devolved from neat military precision to something resembling abstract art, created during an earthquake. "Jake," she said, her voice tight with the strain of trying to process the impossible. "You mentioned your previous job involved toxic waste disposal. Please tell me that was a normal, safe desk job." Jake laughed, a sound that was becoming both familiar and deeply unsettling to the station's crew. "Well, the desk part is right, though it was more of a control chair inside a heavily shielded mech suit. We were cleaning up the Vega incident fallout. You know, the one where they accidentally turned half a solar system into sentient acid rain." "Sentient acid rain," Rex repeated slowly. "Yeah, really chatty stuff. Wouldn't stop complaining about the weather. Ironic when you think about it." Dr. Quillix had given up trying to understand Jake's biology and was now focused on documenting the impossible. His medical readings showed that Jake's cellular structure had been fundamentally altered by exposure to exotic matter. His DNA had been rewritten by cosmic radiation at least 6 times, and his nervous system appeared to be partially composed of crystallized time. "Jake," Quillix said, "our deep tissue scans indicate that you've been exposed to temporal anomalies. Your left arm is apparently 3 minutes younger than your right arm." "Oh yeah, that. Occupational hazard from my stint as a professional disaster tester. The company specialized in worst-case scenario planning. My job was to find out exactly how bad things could get." "Professional disaster tester," Rex said flatly. "Great job, terrible hours. Though the hazard pay was incredible and they had a really good cafeteria. The temporal displacement was from Tuesday, or possibly next Thursday. Time travel gives me a headache." Security footage from Jake's arrival was equally baffling. Enhanced imaging showed that his escape pod had been literally on fire when it entered their docking bay. Not metaphorically on fire, not damaged by fire, but actually burning with what appeared to be the concentrated fury of several small suns. "Jake," Rex said, pulling up the footage on the medical bay's main display. "This shows your ship burning with plasma hot enough to melt neutronium. How did you survive inside it?" Jake squinted at the screen with professional interest. "Oh, that's from when I flew through the Rigel supernova last month. Beautiful light show, but terrible for the paint job. I kept the windows cracked open for ventilation." Bezit had developed a new strategy of fainting preemptively whenever Jake started describing his adventures. She was currently unconscious in the corner, having learned to fall in a safe, comfortable position. "The real question," Jake continued cheerfully, "is whether you folks have any decent coffee around here. Nearly getting dissolved by sentient acid rain always makes me crave caffeine." Dr. Quillix looked at his impossible patient, then at his impossible medical readings, then at his increasingly impossible situation. "Jake," he said carefully, "I think we need to run some more comprehensive tests." "Sure thing, Doc. Just promise me they won't take too long. I've got a job interview tomorrow on a mining station near a black hole. They're looking for someone with experience in high-gravity environments." Rex closed his eyes and wondered if command school had covered protocols for dealing with apparently indestructible humans who treated cosmic disasters like minor inconveniences. It hadn't. Dr. Quillix had reached the end of his considerable rope. After 8 hours of testing, 12 different scanning procedures and 1 consultation with the Galactic Medical Database that had responded with what appeared to be electronic laughter, he was ready to deploy the big guns. "I'm activating the quantum deep tissue scanner," he announced to the assembled crowd of medical personnel, engineers, and increasingly concerned station staff. "Jake," Mills called through the intercom, "you're currently being exposed to enough radiation to kill a small city. How do you feel?" "Warm and relaxed. Is this supposed to do something?" Commander Rex watched the impossible readings with the expression of someone whose worldview had been personally attacked by the universe. Increased to maximum levels. The radiation exposure climbed to levels typically associated with stellar cores and certain types of weapon tests. Jake continued to chat cheerfully about various spa experiences, while the Geiger counters screamed in electronic anguish. "Fascinating," Dr. Quillix muttered, taking notes with all 6 arms simultaneously. "His cellular structure isn't just resistant to radiation, it appears to be converting it into energy? Nutrition? I'm not sure there's a word for what it's doing." Test 2 involved plasma burns. The station's engineers had rigged a controlled plasma torch, typically used for cutting through starship hulls. Jake examined the setup with professional interest. "Nice flame. Good color saturation. What's the operating temperature?" "Hot enough to cut through neutronium," Chief Engineer Torx replied nervously. "Excellent. I once had a plasma burn that took out half my torso. This should be much more manageable." The plasma beam struck Jake's extended hand with the concentrated fury of a small star. Everyone watched the monitors, expecting to see catastrophic tissue damage and immediate medical emergency. Instead, Jake's hand began healing before their eyes, the plasma burns closing as fast as they appeared. "That tickles," Jake reported cheerfully. Though the technique could use some work, the plasma jets on Vega Station had better focus control. "Jake," Rex said carefully, "you're critiquing the efficiency of a weapon that should have vaporized your entire arm. Well, if you're going to do something, you might as well do it right." Test 3 was conducted in the station's cargo bay, where they had enough space for what Dr. Quillix was calling vacuum exposure verification. They suited Jake up in a basic emergency suit, the kind designed for short-term survival in space. Then they opened the cargo bay doors. The emergency suit lasted approximately 15 seconds before the vacuum of space turned it into decorative ribbons. Jake drifted in the void, waving cheerfully at the observation windows. "Jake," Mills's voice came through his emergency communicator. "How are you breathing?" "Oh, I'm not really. Haven't needed to for the last few minutes. Though the view out here is spectacular. You can see the Horsehead Nebula really clearly from this angle." He spent 20 minutes floating in hard vacuum, providing commentary on various astronomical features, and rating the local star formation on a scale of 1 to 10. When they finally brought him back inside, his only complaint was that space was getting a bit chilly. "The thing about vacuum exposure," Jake explained to the increasingly traumatized research team, "is that it's really not as bad as people make it out to be. Sure, your blood tries to boil and your lungs want to explode, but if you just relax and work with it instead of fighting it, it's quite manageable." Dr. Quillix had filled 37 pages of notes and was working on his 38th. "Jake, you just survived in hard vacuum for 20 minutes without life support. This should be physically impossible." "Doc, I've learned that physically impossible is really more of a suggestion than a hard rule. The universe is surprisingly flexible if you ask nicely." Lieutenant Mills looked up from her own notes, which had evolved into something resembling abstract art mixed with existential poetry. "Commander, what exactly are we dealing with here?" Rex stared at Jake, who was now examining the station's experimental warp drive with the casual interest of someone window shopping. "Mills," Rex said quietly, "I think we've just discovered that humanity might be the galaxy's ultimate survival machine, and Jake here might be the proof of concept. Is that good news or bad news?" Rex watched as Jake began offering helpful suggestions about the warp drive's plasma flow regulators, apparently unbothered by the fact that he'd just proven himself immune to death by vacuum. "I honestly have no idea," Rex admitted. 3 weeks later, Persistence Station had become the most scientifically interesting and bureaucratically nightmarish location in the known galaxy. The Galactic Council had dispatched no fewer than 17 research teams, 43 xenobiologists, and one very nervous insurance adjuster to study Jake Morrison, who had cheerfully agreed to cooperate with all research efforts provided they kept the coffee machine well stocked. Dr. Quillix had published 17 papers on Jake's impossible biology, each one more revolutionary than the last. The galactic scientific community had responded with a mixture of acclaim, disbelief, and what appeared to be several nervous breakdowns. 3 universities had offered Jake honorary degrees in applied impossibility. "The thing I don't understand," said Dr. Vextai, the council's chief xenobiologist, "is how you can be so casual about defying the fundamental laws of physics." Jake looked up from his morning coffee, which he was drinking in the station's new observation lounge. The lounge had been built specifically for him, since his presence in the medical bay had caused too many equipment failures. "Well, Doc, I figure the universe is pretty big and I'm just one guy. If the laws of physics can't handle one slightly durable human, maybe they need to be more flexible laws." Lieutenant Mills, who had been promoted to Chief of Impossible Incident Documentation, was working on her 15th report about Jake's daily activities. Today's report would include his successful testing of the station's new experimental warp drive, which he had rated as smooth, but could use more power, and his casual repair of a critical plasma leak that had been threatening to destroy half the engineering section. "Jake," she said, "the council wants to know if there are more humans like you." "Oh, sure, probably. Humans are pretty tough in general. I might be a bit above average, but we're all pretty hard to kill when we put our minds to it." Commander Rex had been fielding communications from military leaders across the galaxy, all of whom wanted to know if humanity was planning to conquer the known universe using their apparent indestructibility. He'd spent the morning explaining that humans were generally peaceful, and that Jake was not, as far as anyone knew, part of a secret invasion force. "The Andorian Defense Council wants to negotiate a non-aggression pact," Rex told Jake over lunch. "Apparently, they're convinced that humanity is a species of unstoppable killing machines." Jake nearly choked on his sandwich. "Killing machines? Commander, I'm a maintenance worker. The most dangerous thing I do on purpose is fix broken coffee machines." "Yes, but you also survived being eaten by a space whale, exposure to supernova radiation, and last week you accidentally walked through a temporal anomaly and came out complaining about the service." "The service was terrible. You go through all the trouble of traveling through time and they don't even validate parking." Bazit had recovered from her serial fainting episodes and had started a support group for station personnel suffering from human impossibility trauma. The meetings were well attended, particularly after Jake had volunteered to help test the station's new emergency systems by personally experiencing every possible disaster scenario. Dr. Quillix was in his element, conducting daily tests on Jake's seemingly unlimited durability. Today's experiment involved exposure to antimatter, which Jake had described as sparkly but not very nutritious. "Jake," Quillix said, reviewing the morning's test results, "according to our readings, you converted the antimatter into some kind of beneficial energy source. This is revolutionizing our understanding of human metabolism. That explains why I'm so perky this morning. Though I think the antimatter needed more seasoning." The station's new designation as a Class A research facility had brought unexpected benefits. They'd received funding for equipment upgrades, expanded their scientific staff, and had been selected to test experimental technologies that would normally be considered too dangerous for inhabited stations. Jake had been officially hired as the station's Director of Hazardous Testing and Disaster Consultation. His job description included surviving anything that might kill everyone else, and providing detailed reviews of existential threats. "We've got a new assignment," Rex announced during the daily staff meeting. "The council wants us to test their new experimental faster-than-light communication system." "What's the catch?" Mills asked. "It works by briefly converting the test subject into pure energy and transmitting them across the galaxy." Everyone turned to look at Jake, who brightened considerably. "That sounds fantastic. I've always wondered what it would be like to exist as an energy pattern. When do we start? Dr. Quillick sighed and reached for his testing protocols. Bezized preemptively fainted. Mills updated Jake's personnel file, which now listed his emergency contact as whoever finds the pieces, and his occupation as professional survivor. Commander Rex watched his impossible human consultant volunteer for what would normally be considered elaborate suicide, and realized that Persistence Station had become the galaxy's unofficial testing ground for everything, too dangerous to try anywhere else. Jake finished his coffee and stood up, ready for another day of casually defying the laws of physics and making the universe's top scientists question their career choices. "So," Jake said cheerfully, "what are we blowing up today?" Rex smiled despite himself. It had been the most interesting month of his career, and somehow he was starting to look forward to finding out just how impossible tomorrow would be. After all, with Jake around, impossible had become just another word for Tuesday.